All right, we're about to dive into a really tragic and honestly bizarre story that just swept across the internet. It's one of those stories that completely blurs the line between a myth and a terrifying reality. And it all begins with a single, very cryptic social media post.
So it all kicks off with just these two words, now, pa. The first is Japanese for meow. The second is Russian for bye. This was posted right alongside a final selfie, and it was the last public message from a teenage girl whose death would, unbelievably, ignite a global panic. And right here, this is the moment. This is when a deeply personal, heartbreaking tragedy starts to morph into something else entirely. Rena's selfie, that cryptic message, and then the horrific photos of her death that went viral, they became the building blocks for a legend that would have devastating real-world consequences. Because Rena's death was really just the beginning. Very quickly, it was linked to a so-called game that seemed to be claiming more and more victims. And each new case just added another terrifying layer to this growing horror story.
So investigators start looking into these other tragic deaths, and what they find is, well, it's pretty chilling. They notice these similarities. These girls were in the same kinds of online groups filled with pictures of Rena. And then you have these strange drawings, blue whales, butterflies popping up. It just didn't feel like a series of coincidences. It felt like some kind of script was being followed.
And that script was supposedly this, the Blue Whale Challenge, a 50-day series of tasks that were designed to psychologically break people down. It would start with something kind of weird, like waking up at 4:20 a.m. to watch a scary movie, but it would escalate, pushing players towards isolation, self-harm, and then the final horrific command. So you have to wonder, right? How did these scattered tragedies get packaged into a full-blown moral panic? Well, it turns out all it took was one piece of journalism to light the fuse. It absolutely exploded the story from these niche internet forums into the mainstream. In May of 2016, this article, Death Groups, just went viral. It claimed there was this coordinated plot responsible for up to 130 teenage suicides, and it all started with Rena Polanova. It painted this terrifying picture of shadowy curators hunting vulnerable kids online. But almost immediately, other journalists in Russia started raising huge red flags. They pointed out there was a complete lack of real evidence. That number, 130, totally unsubstantiated. And the tone was way more sensationalist than investigative. And here's the real fear they had. The concern was that this article wasn't just reporting on a phenomenon, it was actually fueling it. And that's a huge takeaway here. A sensational story can spread way faster than the truth, and sometimes it creates the very reality it claims to be exposing.
So this is the crucial question, isn't it? If the game wasn't really real in the way the article claimed, how in the world did it become so dangerous? And this is where the story takes a really fascinating and, frankly, a deeply disturbing turn.
The answer actually comes from the world of folklore. It's this concept that explains how stories can literally leap off the screen and into our physical world. It's called ostension. Basically, it's what happens when people, often teenagers, hear about a legend or a story and then they start to act it out. They make the myth real through their own actions. So they hear about a game, they see the headlines, and they start looking for it. Or even worse, they start performing the rituals themselves. And if this sounds familiar, it should. We have seen this exact kind of thing play out before. Remember the whole Slender Man story? A completely fictional internet monster led to a horrific real-world stabbing. The Blue Whale Challenge followed that same tragic pattern. The media panic didn't just report on a danger, it actually created a script for vulnerable teens to follow. Okay, so what did investigators find when they finally pulled back the curtain on all this panic? Well, the reality of it all was both less sensational and, in some ways, even more tragic. So police did arrest a real person, an administrator named Philip Budeikin, who actually confessed to encouraging teenagers towards suicide. He was a real person preying on real victims. But here's the thing. He wasn't the head of some huge, shadowy conspiracy. He was ultimately charged with inciting 15 deaths. Now, don't get me wrong, 15 is a horrific, tragic number, but it is a world away from the 130 that the media was throwing around. The reality was just vastly different from the myth that had been created. And this, right here, is maybe the most telling discovery of all. Folklorists spent 9 months inside these so-called death groups, and what did they find? Mostly just kids, waiting around for a game that never actually started. They were drawn in by the legend, looking for something that was more of an idea than a reality.
But despite all of this, the panic itself went global. The idea of the Blue Whale Challenge took on a life of its own, completely detached from the facts. The legend had become way more powerful than the reality, and it was causing real fear and even copycat behavior all across the world.
So it really leaves you with this kind of spooky question, doesn't it? The whole Blue Whale Challenge is this grim reminder that in our hyper-connected world, the line between just a story and an actual action can be terrifyingly thin. And once a legend is told, it can truly develop a life of its own.